Hard work is supposed to be the ultimate solution, especially for smart students, and that belief is repeated so often that it feels unquestionable. Study longer, push harder, sacrifice more, and success will eventually come. But here's the uncomfortable truth psychology reveals. Hard work is not what makes smart students succeed, and in many cases, it's exactly what causes them to fail. Smart students are often the ones who burn out first, lose motivation, forget what they studied, and feel confused about why their effort isn't translating into results. The problem isn't laziness, and it isn't a lack of intelligence. The problem is that most smart students are taught to equate effort with progress, even when their brain is learning inefficiently. The human brain doesn't reward effort, it rewards adaptation. When you force yourself to study for long hours without changing how you think, your brain switches into survival mode, not learning mode. Psychology shows that learning is not about how long you study, but how your brain is engaged during that time. Smart students often fall into the trap of overworking because they rely on discipline instead of strategy. They reread notes, highlight textbooks, solve similar problems repeatedly, and feel productive because they are busy, but busyness is not the same as growth. The brain gets better at exactly what you train it to do. And if you train it to recognize patterns passively instead of actively solving problems, it becomes dependent, slow, and fragile under pressure. This is why smart students can study for hours and still blank out during exams. Their brain was trained to feel familiar with information, not to retrieve it under stress. Another psychological reason hard work fails is cognitive overload. The brain has a limited working memory, and when you push too much information without rest or reflection, learning collapses silently. Smart students often ignore this because they can handle more than average students at first, but that advantage becomes a weakness over time. Instead of simplifying ideas, they pile complexity on top of complexity until nothing sticks. Psychology calls this illusion of competence. You feel like you understand because the information looks familiar, but the moment you're tested, the understanding disappears. Hard work also fails because it encourages fear-based motivation. Many smart students work hard not out of curiosity, but out of anxiety. The fear of falling behind, disappointing others, or wasting potential. Fear narrows attention. It makes the brain rigid, defensive, and less creative. Under fear, the brain prioritizes short-term survival, not long-term understanding. This is why some of the hardest working students struggle with deep thinking, problem-solving, and originality. They're trained to avoid mistakes instead of exploring ideas. Psychology shows that learning accelerates when the brain feels safe to fail, reflect, and adjust, not when it is constantly pressured to perform. Another hidden reason hard work fails is that it removes friction from thinking. Smart students often overstructure their study. Strict schedules, rigid methods, constant productivity tracking. While this feels disciplined, it leaves no space for mental struggle, and struggle is where learning actually happens. When learning feels smooth all the time, your brain isn't changing. Geniuses don't learn by avoiding confusion, they lean into it. They let questions remain unanswered longer, they sit with uncertainty, and they allow boredom and discomfort to reorganize their thoughts. Hard work, as most students practice it, eliminates this process by forcing constant input without synthesis. This leads to shallow knowledge that collapses under complexity. There is also the problem of identity. Smart students are often praised for being smart, not for how they think. Over time, this creates an unconscious need to protect that identity. They work hard to maintain the image of competence, not to challenge their understanding. Psychology shows that when intelligence becomes an identity, learning slows down because the brain avoids situations that threaten that identity. Instead of asking better questions, students focus on looking prepared. Instead of exploring weak areas, they double down on strengths. Hard work becomes a defense mechanism, not a growth tool. This is why some students improve rapidly early on, then suddenly plateau. Their effort increases, but their thinking doesn't evolve. The most dangerous part is that hard work masks the real problem. When results don't improve, students assume they need even more effort, more hours, more pressure. This creates a feedback loop of exhaustion and frustration, but the students who break out of this cycle do something different. They shift from effort-based learning to feedback-based learning. They test themselves frequently, not to score high, but to expose gaps. They study less, but think more. They simplify ideas until they can explain them clearly. They allow rest, not as laziness, but as a cognitive reset. Psychology shows that insight often emerges during pauses, not during intense focus. This is why stepping away from a problem can suddenly make the solution obvious. Geniuses understand that effort is a tool, not a virtue. They apply it selectively, where it produces adaptation, not exhaustion. They care more about how their brain changes after a study session than how long the session lasted. Hard work only works when it is paired with the right mental habits: active recall, deliberate difficulty, reflection, and curiosity-driven exploration. Without these, effort becomes noise. So the real question is not whether you're working hard, but whether your hard work is training your brain to think better or just to endure more. Once you understand this, studying stops being about sacrifice and starts becoming about strategy. And that's the moment smart students stop failing, not because they worked harder, but because they finally learned how their brain actually learns.